Seed shopping, why do you purchase or save seeds? Cheaper than transplants? That may kind of be true. It's fun to start my own. That's definitely one for me. Get started gardening before the weather is good. That's definitely one for me. Job satisfaction and some of those. So, one of the biggest ones for me is I can't find the cultivars that I want to get. The nurseries all seem to carry the same thing. I don't care for some of the cultivars that are out there, and I have some that I really like, and finding the seeds for those is a lot easier than trying to find the transplant. There are some terms when we talk about seed saving that we're going to cover, and then we'll talk about doing an inventory and planning out what you're going to purchase. The problem is a lot of times we get out there, we get these catalogs and we start thumbing through the catalogs. Oh yeah, that'd be good, that'd be good, that'd be good. And you end up with this pile of seeds and you don't have enough garden space for them, right? And so maybe we ought to plan that out just a little bit more. We'll talk about some of the sources, some of the genetics, things that we'll cover there, and treatments. And finally, we'll look at storage ways, because if you get a lot of seeds, you buy a lot of seeds, you carry them over from one year to the next. It's really good if you can keep them viable for several years until you use that up. Otherwise, it can be actually quite expensive. So terms. Now these are terms that you may find on the seed packets or in catalogs, and so a lot of times just understanding the terms will help us to do well in here. So hybrid versus GMO. A lot of times people confuse this term hybrid versus GMO. They're not the same thing. So let's talk about that a little bit. First of all, hybrids are cross-pollinated plants of the same species. They're cross-pollinated. So you've got pepper plants and you want to cross-pollinate pepper plants. Hybrid is you've got unrelated parents, but it's intentional for that cross-pollination. So if I have a tomato plant that I really love, and I want to maybe try to get some genetics from another tomato plant, I will make it so that the only pollen that gets on that tomato flower is one that I want it to be. And so that's what hybrid is. You don't want to save seeds from these because they will not breed to it. It takes several generations and a lot of selection for you to pick a plant and pick characteristics that you want to save. If you want to be able to save seed from it, it takes several generations. Well, the point here is if you've got a plant and you want to have the characteristics of this plant and that plant, and you put those together, and what you come up with is a very nice F1 hybrid, you have to do that every year if you want that same thing every time, or you have to go through a whole selection process of several years, many years sometimes, getting that worked out to where you got the specific characteristics that you want. So if you keep those seeds, they don't breed true. You'll have a shotgun approach. It's kind of like if you keep an apple seed from an apple tree and try to, you have a really nice pink lady apple or whatever, and you keep the seeds and you plant those and they grow, and you're not going to get pink lady apple. Same thing with sweet corn. Sweet corn is it's hybrid. There are some kind of sweet corns that they're not really very sweet, but they're kind of sweet corns that are open pollinated. But almost all your sweet corn seed, first of all, is grown in Idaho, and then almost all of your sweet corn is F1 hybrid. Anyway, it's a bit of a complicated process with sweet corn. Anyway, so that's what hybrids are. Okay, the GMO, that's where you start getting some the technology involved in here, and they have this ability to take a specific gene out of one plant and insert it into the gene of a different plant. And there's a reason for them to do that. There's some gene that they want to put in there. The biggest one that is very well known, is the BT gene that's been taken out of Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a natural product that kills insects. It kills, well, the one we think about in corn, of course, is the one for lepidopteran or caterpillars. And that gene will kill the caterpillar when it eats that particular gene. It paralyzes the gut of the caterpillar and it dies. So there's a specific reason for that. And typically, I guess it's kind of like playing God. You're taking a gene and you've got this way of of splicing that into a different plant, and then you grow that plant out, and it's got the gene in it. So now we've got that passing on from one to another. Now, I'm not going to talk about the politics of it at all, but that's what it is. And usually there's some sort of pest resistance kind of a thing that they like to do. The Roundup resistant crops, a lot of Roundup resistant crops, and those are GMO products, the gene that is resistant to Roundup, so that hopefully we don't have to do as much driving up and down the fields to try to cultivate and keep the weeds out of our crops so you can spray them. You know, it kind of depends on what monster you want to welcome into your farm. You know, you want to, people complain about your carbon footprint. Well, okay, let's do this GMO. Then they complain about, well, you've got that, you're spraying the chemicals. Well, you can't have both. You got to pick your poison, I guess, and to coin a phrase. Anyway, so GMO is not, I'm not going to say it's good or bad. It's a personal choice that you would have. They're tested well, and there's a reason for it. Now, we also have hybrid versus open pollinated, and that's a little bit different. We got all this stuff on the hybrid above. The open pollinated is it's a natural pollination process, and this is where you would get the bees and the birds and other things, wind, that is just kind of taking that natural pollination process and crossing the plant. This does kind of ensure genetic diversity. Typically what will happen is you have a plant that has adapted to a specific environment, and the open pollinated plant then will breed true. The characteristics of that plant will breed true, and you'll have that same plant over and over again. You know, for example, I love the white wonder tomato. Tomatoes tend to be self-pollinating, and so but it's open pollinated, the whole natural process of pollination, and I collect the seed and I grow the seed and I get white wonder tomatoes every year, and it's wonderful. So, but you do have that potential of genetic adaptation, natural selection. If there aren't other cultivars or varieties present with certain plants, like the corn that is open pollinated, it's open pollinated, but it's pollinating itself. If you've got something else, a field corn that's blowing pollen into it, it'll be cross pollinated, and so it breeds true if there aren't other cultivars or varieties present. And, you know, a good example is squash. You can have several different squash plants in your garden or in the neighborhood, and the bees are visiting and they're changing the pollen around, things like that. It's not going to affect this year's fruit, but it will probably affect next year's fruit. If you kept the seed from your zucchini because you really liked it, and you had some zucchini and you had some yellowneck squash, you had some other squash plants out there, it's very likely you'll get something totally different. So it's that cultivar's got to be the one that's there, and not get that too much of the cross pollination from these other cultivars. But it is really good for seed saving, especially for those that tend to be self-pollinating. Tomatoes are a really good example. Peppers they can be cross-pollinated a little bit more easily than the tomatoes are, but typically they're not. And so anyway, so they're good for that. Now, we also have another term. You'll say, you know, whether it's open pollinated, but you'll also hear this other term, heirloom. And what does heirloom mean? Well, all heirloom plants are open pollinated, but not all open pollinated plants are heirloom. Heirloom is more of a historical kind of a thing. So open pollinated is that natural process. You got the genetic diversity and adaptation, things like that. Heirloom has some sort of historical significance, and some people say, well, it can't be an heirloom if it's not at least 50-year-old cultivar or variety or whatever the case may be, that's been breeding true for that long of a time. If it's not got that kind of a history, then it's not an heirloom. It's just open pollinated. But both of those are good for saving seeds. Now we have conventional seeds versus organic seeds. The conventional seeds may or may not use synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. If they don't go through the process of certifying being organic, even if they do organic practices, they're not organic because they haven't been certified organic, but they may still follow the organic practices. And those restrictions are based on your EPA approval. So it depends on your situation, pest, crop, things like that, to determine whether or not it's going to be conventional or so this is your production inputs that determine conventional versus organic. It has nothing to do with genetics. And then the organic, you have to use OMRI listed pest control products in order for it to be marketed as organic. And those OMRI listed products are all from natural sources. It doesn't mean they're less toxic or less poisonous. Your OMRI listed just means it came from a natural source as opposed to a synthetic source. Your organic inputs, it may be expensive to use them, and a lot of times they're not as effective. So that's the organic and congenital. Some other terms now. These are kind of fun terms: gynoecious, dioecious, monoecious, and parthenocarpic. So what gynoecious means is it's like a gynecologist, right? So it's female plants, female flowers. A plant that is gynoecious produces predominantly, if not all, and it may be all, female flowers. So a good example is there's some cucumbers that are gynoecious. So all it does, they do is produce female flowers. That doesn't mean they don't need to be pollinated. That just means that they produce female flowers. And so a lot of times you need to have a plant that has the male flowers on there as well to get the pollination. The dioecious means that you've got a male and a female plant. You got a male plant and a female plant. An example of that would be the ash tree. You have male ash trees and you have female ash trees. They're imperfect flowers, and imperfect just means that you have the two different sexes are separate. You've got two separate flowers. One is a female flower, one is a male flower. So if they're on different plants, you don't have them on the same plant, on different plants, then they're called dioecious. So di meaning two, so two homes. Monoecious, mono meaning one, means you've got the male and the female flowers. Again, they're still imperfect flowers. You got those male and female flowers on the same plant. A good example of that is corn, sweet corn. You got the tassel on the top that produces the pollen. You got the silks down where the ears are. That's the female flower. So you got the male, female flowers, and that's monoecious. Parthenocarpic is a plant that does not need pollination. So you have a lot of your greenhouse tomatoes they may be gynoecious and need pollination, or they may be gynoecious and not need pollination. Okay. They may be dioecious too and still not need pollination, but they're going to be pollinated because there are bugs growing around. But that's what parthenocarpic means, that it doesn't require pollination for the fruit to develop. And your seedless watermelon is parthenocarpic. It doesn't need pollination for it to become watermelon plant. Okay, inventory plans. What information would help improve your seed selection? So are you looking at a catalog? Are you looking at the rack in the store, the nursery, and you're looking at this? So what helps you when you're selecting seeds? You're looking for species, cultivar, the purchase date, when it's supposed to be planted date or plant by or whatever, its collection date, the color, growth characteristics, time of year harvested, number of desired plants, days to maturity, disease resistance, seed treatment, volume, price. Days to maturity. In our growing area, that is critical. We need to know. It's really silly to grow popcorn around here. You actually could start popcorn indoors and transplant it outside, but I'm still not sure you'd make it through the season. It kind of depends. You don't want to get corn over so many days, or even tomatoes. These long season tomatoes, you just need to be careful with that. So that's a really important one there. Cultivar, a lot of the cultivars are the growth characteristics that you're looking for. Will that fit your gardening system? Disease resistance is very big, and so we'll talk about some of that. So inventory and plan. So how much, how old, how viable are these seeds? If you've kept some seeds for a little while, you may want to check them out. Another thing is, you're looking at this inventory is grow what you like to eat. I don't grow okra and I don't grow eggplant because I don't like either one of them. Now, Lena likes them, and so she grows them, but not Ron. He doesn't like those, and so why would I grow those? If I had a market that I was selling them to, yeah, maybe I would try it. But if I'm in my home garden in the back growing what I want to eat. I don't want to put a lot of effort into those two crops. And so I don't grow those. So think about what your family will eat, and that's what you grow. And then the other, how much to grow. There are a lot of tools out there online. You can say how much we're going to grow. And part of that depends on if you just eat fresh or if you're going to be processing, growing enough to process. And we like to can and have stuff through the whole center. So fresh versus processed. How cheap is it? You buy it at the store. We don't grow pumpkins for pumpkin pie. We grow pumpkins for the jack-o'-lanterns. You can get pumpkin pretty cheap at the store, the canned pumpkin stuff. And since I don't like pumpkin pie, it doesn't make a difference to me, but my wife likes to make it. So anyway, and then of course, how much space do you have? So you have to keep those things all into consideration when you're looking at that. Now, my very first garden was a little spot. I lived in a trailer court and a little spot by the fence, and it was about maybe 25 square feet. I've grown a bit big. My dad's garden was big. It's probably about 3,000 square feet, and he had a large family, and so we did a lot of processing as a kid, and so it was big. When I was down in Price, I actually did a lot of selling at the farmer's market. I was kind of running the farmer's market too when I was doing it, and my garden was about 30,000 square feet. Well, that's a lot of garden, and it kept me busy from the beginning to the end. And so when I got to October, I was worn out. But my garden now is kind of a mid-sized garden, about 4,000 square feet, and so it's enough to keep me busy, but not so much that it really wears me out. It's a lot of fun. I can play around with it and change things around, and I really enjoy it. So think about your garden size. How much space do you have? If you've got 200 square feet, well, you have to be very picky on what you want to grow. What is your family going to eat and things like that? Okay. So this is kind of an example of my inventory thing, my seed inventory. Put it on and it's easy if you put it on a spreadsheet, then you just kind of update it. Right now, I've been doing it in a notepad, but spreadsheet that I've got these White Wonder, and so I've got the cultivar and the year that I harvested that or bought it, and where I got it, and how much I have. And so if I didn't want to count them, I just put plenty, enough for this year, enough for that year. And so I've got some White Wonder, which again is my favorite tomato, and I've got plenty of seed there, and I save a little bit every year. So everything's good. These hybrids, this Better Boy, Big Boy hybrid, I got only a few seeds left of those. I bought them a couple of years ago, and Carbon and Sun Gold Select, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't put the year on that. I can't remember why. Anyway, so now over here on this notes here, I would put down something. For example, I remember 2 or 3 years ago, I got some seed. It's called Pink Wonder. So I thought, well, yeah, maybe that'll be like the White Wonder. And so I grew that. I grew 2 or 3 plants of it because that's how many seeds I got. And that thing, those fruit, didn't matter what I did, those fruit were splitting. Every one of them were splitting, big ugly cracks in them. And that's not going to work. It's not going to work for my system. That might work for somebody else's, but it's not going to work for my system. And so I don't grow that anymore. I do like that Amish paste. It's an indeterminate paste tomato. Roma is, you look at that's 2003. I don't even know. I've got to check those seeds to see if they're even viable still. So that's kind of a way to keep track of your inventory. What are you growing? And you may put in here your notes each year. So I will update this each year. It'll be a different sheet. And so I would put down here any production notes on there, splits really bad, things like that. Okay. So seed sources. Where do you go most often for your seeds? I'm kind of glad to see this local garden center. I am a strong believer in supporting the local garden center if they have the cultivars that I want. And that's the challenge, is finding some of these. You're not going to find White Wonder. Matter of fact, it's even hard to find that one in the catalogs. So I keep my own. That's why I save my own. But the local garden centers, they carry the candy onion, and I love candy onion. And so I buy my candy onion seed from the local suppliers. I'm a strong believer in the local economy, but I do go to other sources sometimes to find some of the disease-resistant cultivars, especially with the zucchini and things like that, that you can't find at the local stores. Now, if you talk to the local suppliers, maybe you could get them to they get them from, some of them will package their own seeds. but they get them from somewhere. And so you get them to start, hey, people are starting to ask for this particular cultivar. Maybe I should start carrying this particular. They're going to respond to you as the customer. They will respond to you because it's your money they're taking, right? And so if you're saying, well, I guess I'm gonna have to go online because I can't find the cultivars I want here. These are the cultivars I want. Can you get these for me soon? Or do I need to go online? And you know, you start getting that kind of pressure on them, they'll respond. That's their job, is to respond to the customers. So let's look at this. And this is just, you know, the local stores, the catalogs, seed saving and seed swap. The local stores and the catalogs, they're going to provide seeds that have been harvested to be used this year. Now, at the end of the season, you can maybe buy seeds cheap for next year. If you store correctly, you'll have some seeds for the next year that save you some money on that. The seed swap, that's kind of fun to see what other people are growing and maybe try things out. You know, sometimes you buy things from catalogs and they'll send you some free seeds. And Lena was just telling me today that there's a couple of seeds she got free from catalogs when she bought the seeds from them, and they send a free packet. Here, try this one out. Here, try this one. And I've had them do that too. And you try them out, and yeah, that's a pretty good one. So like the citrine tomato, that actually turned out to be a pretty nice little cherry tomato. So, you know, they send them they're trying to get those out there and get you to try them and see if it will take, and if it will, great. So catalogs they're kind of pushing things and trying to market things, but if you like what they've got, great, that's a good source. Seed saving, again, open pollinated type plants, and beans and peas are typically self-pollinating. Now they may be hybrid, but typically they're going to be pretty close to the same as what you had before. Genetics, we're looking for specific characteristics. So for example, I like all my tomatoes to be indeterminate. I bought a really nice Roma, Big Mama Roma, and it was a big meaty Roma, and the catalog said it was indeterminate. So I grew it and I started to prune it like it was indeterminate, and it was definitely not indeterminate. It was a determinate tomato that got about 24 inches tall, and so I lost a lot of tomatoes because of the way I was pruning it. So you're looking for the characteristics that will work in your system, whatever you like it to be. And if you want to have a bush type cucumber, well, those are the kinds of characteristics that you would be looking for then. Or butter bush, it's a small bush type butternut squash, and the fruit is a lot smaller. It's a lot better for a family of two. And you know, the butternut is a big, meaty, really, I like butternut squash, and it's a nice, big, meaty squash that will feed a family of 10, you know. Well, depends on how much squash you like to eat. But anyway, so this butterbush is a nice little butternut squash. It doesn't take up nearly as much space as the Waltham butternut squash does. Disease resistance. So think about the diseases that you have here. You know, some of the tomato diseases, whether it's tomato spot virus or you can't curly top virus, that you don't find any disease. There's some that kind of say they're resistant to curly top virus, but we did some research down in Utah that's not as resistant as we hoped they had been. But your powdery mildew and things like that, get some. If you have a problem, and we always have a problem with powdery mildew around here, you're not going to get rid of the fungus spores. They're always here. And so you need to, the best thing is to find the disease resistance. And so do some research and figure out what will work best for those disease pressures that you're wanting to. And then we have a short growing season. Now we can kind of cheat on that. We can start our plants earlier and get them into the ground earlier and protect them, or we can just let them, you know, plant them out when people normally plant them out, or plant the seeds. Now I remember when I was growing up in Rexburg, we wanted to have tomatoes about the time the kids came back to college. When we were harvesting our tender crops and making sure that they were harvested. Besides, Dad worked at the college, and so we had to get things done before he got busy there. But we would pick a lot of tomatoes and finish ripening them in the garage, just because we had a really short growing season. And so Dad planted he planted his corn all at the same time, but one was an early corn and one was a late corn, you know, a couple of weeks in between them, so he didn't get any cross-pollination between them. And so our early corn would come off this patch and the late corn would come off that, mostly because of the days to maturity. So that's a kind of a way to do succession planting as well. Okay. Another thing that these commercial people look for, they're looking specifically, you know, your tomatoes, They don't want tomatoes that have stems on them that when they roll them down the conveyor, they end up puncturing the holes in other fruit and things like that. Now they'll have them some on a stem, green stem vine ripened tomato, but that's the topic for a different video. Your shipping life, your shelf life, those types of things for the commercial guys, that's important because they need to be able to sell them and get them shipped to the end destination. Uniformity of size. And some of these cultivars, you'll have a big one and a little one, and there'll be a lot of variability in there. So that's what they're looking for. But in the home, we're looking for flavor and special uses, size and shape. You want a little, I like a really big tomato for my bacon tomato sandwiches. I don't care, the aromas can be small as long as they're easy to peel for processing, things like that. Your smooth leaves versus your Savoy leaves, your spinach types, you got really crinkly leaves, and that's kind of hard to wash off. You got the smooth leaves, so that's something to look at. Do you need to remove the seeds? So squash plants, are they easy to remove the seeds from? Easy to shell. The peas, are they easy to shell, easy to pick? The beans, are they string? Multiple use. Now, one of my favorite pumpkins from a year, and I haven't been able to find the seed again. I have to look for it, I guess. It's called the triple treat pumpkin. And so you got the jack-o'-lantern. It's a big enough size for jack-o'-lantern, so that's one treat. And then you have the flavor of the pumpkin meat, which we never used anyway, but people take the meat out of the pumpkin and make pumpkin pies. And then the seeds and this pumpkin were hulless. You didn't have to take the hull from the seed. You could just roast those seeds. And they were great. I mean, I love that triple treat pumpkin, and I haven't grown it for a while. So you're determined, indeterminate. I talked about that one there. The storage life of the fruit can be an important thing in your home storage as well. All right, disease resistance, powdery mildew, downy mildew, and resistance versus tolerant is different. Tolerant is it'll tolerate the disease, but more likely to get it. Resistant, you got more resistance. Now, very seldom will they be immune to the diseases. Grafting, you can do grafting just like they do with your apple trees, and that's kind of fun. I've grafted tomatoes before. Tomatoes and melons are the ones that are most common, and the reason they do that is because they'll find a rootstock then that's more resistant to some of the soil-borne diseases, but the top is not got the characteristics they want, so they'll graft the characteristics of the scion onto the rootstock. They do that a lot more back east than they do here with soil disease issues. Okay, and then keeping your season. Remember, this is a probability table, and this comes from the Farmer's Almanac. They've got really good records on this. Anyway, May 17th, 50% of the time, the last frost date in the spring is going to be after May 17th, and 50% of the time it's going to be before May 17th. They don't say how far before May 17th, but 50% of the time before. Well, since I've been here in 2019 through this last year, 3 years, we've had frosts in June, after the 15th of June. All right, different seed treatments real quickly. Inoculant, and this refers to those that fix nitrogen from the air. So your beans and your peas can be inoculated with the mycorrhiza that will help it to fix our nitrogen from the air, and so you don't have to fertilize them. And now they're going to inoculate themselves. This just kind of speeds it up a little bit. I haven't had any of those that didn't become inoculated, didn't grow the nodules. And so, whether or not you need it is another issue. I know some people say you've got to have it. I'm not so sure that's true, but fungicide, if you have a problem with really wet soil, which is not usually a problem around here, but you have a heavy soil that's really wet, then a fungicide may be helpful. But just keep in mind that the fungicide is also going to have an effect on that natural beneficial fungus that's in the soil that helps the plants to grow better. So I would hesitate to put fungicide on my seeds. And then pelleted, your really small seeds are sometimes hard to handle. The pelleted makes it a little easier to handle. I don't think it affects the germination, but it may be slow down the germination just a little bit for that it's usually a clay that covering over the top of that to make it bigger, and then that as it gets wet, it flakes off and the seeds germinate. So scarification, stratification. Scarification is some sort of a mechanical wearing away of the seed coat, and some seeds need that. So you look at your seed packet. A lot of flowers, especially if you're going to keep flowers, you look at the seed packet, and if it has special requirements for germination, scarification, then you need to come up with a way, and it may be using a sandpaper on them, something to kind of break that seed coat. Stratification is a chilling process, and it needs to be a moist stratification, not a dry stratification. And so you put it into a plastic bag with a moist paper towel and put that in the refrigerator for however long it says to do that stratification, and that should work well on that. Okay, storage. If you're gonna do storage, I like to do. I put mine in a plastic bag and I seal it off, get the the air out of there, and then I seal it off and store it that way. The main thing is to have cool, dry, dark. That's your best storage areas. Not freezing doesn't, I mean, you could do it in freezer, but that doesn't make that much of a difference. But not really cold, just a cool, dry. So if you've got a room in your basement or someplace like that that's dry, even worse though than if you have it going fluctuating cool and dry, that's a little bit of a problem. So you want it consistent. My basement's not really hot, not really cold. And so that's where I store my seeds. I store them out of the light and no moisture again, and then keep them sealed off so that there aren't any pests. So if you're going to store seeds from one year to the next, and I have seeds that are 10 years old and they're still germinating just fine. So if you've got them stored correctly, most of them will store actually a lot longer than they say. But if you've been a couple of years out, you may want to just start doing some germination tests just to see.
What are your tests to determine a seed's viability?
So what I like to do is I take a chunk of paper towel.
Yep.
And I put that in a plastic bag, a Ziploc bag or sandwich bag, snack bags, or, the small ones. You stick that paper towel in there, and then you put some seeds on it, and you squirt some water in there. Count your seeds, put out, 10 seeds. That's fine. Put out 10 seeds. And then I seal it off as long as it's got air in there. It's got enough oxygen. So seeds need to have oxygen, temperature, and moisture, sometimes light. But all seeds have got to have oxygen, temperature, and moisture in order to germinate. And so if you do that, I've done that, and I'll have seeds, even tomato seeds, within about 3 days are germinating. And so if you've got that plastic bag and a paper towel in there, right? If you turn it over so that the paper's on top, the roots, the radicle won't get tangled up in the paper because it wants to grow down. It knows gravity, so it wants to grow down. And so if you do it that way with the paper on top, when you're ready to look at it, you flip it over and you see some of those. You can actually, with tweezers, very carefully pull those out and plant those.
And you can just cut them out with scissors and plant them too.
Well, you could, yeah, if it's not too crowded. And I actually start quite a lot of my seeds that way. You can start them that way and then transplant them into the pot. You're saving space.